I've worked a lot of different jobs over the years and had a lot of different bosses as well. And one of my favorites, though, was a guy named Mike. When I was going through college, I lost my job when the housing market crashed. I was looking for a new job and started working for this guy. And it was a great change because my previous boss before Mike was a little bit insane. And so it was really pleasant to have a boss who didn't actually set my pants on fire while I was wearing them. And at the time, I started working for them and I started going through Bible college, and it was really interesting. Mike was an atheist. And so he called us go-godders and didn't really know how to deal with me. He was really astounded one day as I told him, I went home and read the Bible every night, and he's like, wait, I thought you'd already read it. And so I began to try, and share my faith with him. And I told him, kind of my story, what God had brought me through and how amazing it all was. And his response, was really stuck with me. He said, well, that's great for you. He said, my problem is, he said, I don't really have anything to be forgiven of. And at the time, I was so astounded, I didn't really know how to respond to it. And, so last week we talked about the fear of God and the recognition of God's holiness and His justice. And sometimes there's this fear, I talked about, where if we portray God as being the judge who everybody will one day stand against, there's this association that somehow that understanding of God means we will love less. If you'll open with me to the book of Luke chapter 7, Jesus makes the point that it is quite the opposite, that a proper understanding of God and His greatness will cause us to love more. Luke chapter 7. Starting in verse 36. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Now this is interesting. If you've read through the Gospels, you understand that this group called the Pharisees and Jesus did not often get along. In fact, they were the ones really trying to kill him. So it's kind of interesting that one of them invites him over as a guest. If you can think for a second from the Pharisees' point of view, Jesus was this very popular teacher at the time. A lot of people were talking about, he's a prophet. Maybe there's rumors circulating that he might claim to be the Messiah. And so a famous person comes to town. So he invites him to dinner. Maybe as a way to increase his own status or recognition, maybe out of curiosity. So Jesus shows up and he reclines at the table with him. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life. The Bible doesn't really give us any details. It just says that she lived a sinful life, learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. Have you ever been at a place, maybe at a family barbecue or a reunion or some outing, and an uninvited guest shows up? Maybe an uninvited guest that a lot of people there don't really like? I imagine that suddenly there's a new topic of conversation for everybody at this dinner party as she shows up. I worked hard on that drawing. Don't laugh. I'm trying to picture what it'd be like today. All right, so this lady shows up. She's just a hot mess, all right? No, I'm serious. We're going to read. She's a hot mess. It can apply to anybody. No. And so she shows up, and all of a sudden, what is she doing? And if this had happened here, the people would have been, I think, blessing her heart. Bless her heart, she looks like she got run over by a donkey. They'd be saying stuff like this. So she shows up, and that's going on. Everybody's looking at her. And let me just challenge you, church. As we launch Celebrate Recovery, we are inviting them in. And so I want you to think somebody may show up at church drunk. I'm just saying. When I was in youth ministry, I pulled in to the church and I saw two kids smoking in the parking lot. I was like, yes! We're attracting the right people. Now, they weren't regulars. If they were like leaders in the church, what are you guys doing? But I want you to be ready for when that person shows up here at church. I want you to be blessed in their hearts like that. And I want you to ask yourself, your response on that Sunday morning, will it look like Jesus or the Pharisees in the crowd? Let's read on. So this woman walks in, she's got, and then everybody's like, well, she got perfume. Verse 38. She goes up to Jesus. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Now, as people ate during that time, they didn't, sit in chairs at the higher tables we have now. They would recline. It would kind of have a low table, and everybody would be laying kind of propped up on their left elbow with your feet out and kind of reclining in a circle around the table there. And so Jesus is doing that. He's laying there, and this woman comes up behind him. And she's just overwhelmed, and she's crying. It doesn't even say if she says anything. And she looks down, and as she's weeping, she realizes that her tears are falling on his feet, and she doesn't have a towel or anything. She just goes down, and she takes the symbol of her honor, her hair, and uses her hair to perform a slave's work, very, very humbling. And she just kind of wipes his feet with her hair, and then she takes this perfume and just pours it out on his feet. And this is playing out in public, surrounded by people who didn't think much of her. And I imagine an awkward silence. What is Jesus going to do? When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of a woman she is. She is a sinner. Now, like I said, public opinion at this time was that Jesus was a prophet. Pharisees were very uneasy with this thought. They held a lot of influence and a lot of sway. Somebody else comes along and challenges that authority. Simon probably felt no small amount of relief at the thought. Because the Pharisees, their mindset was this. They wanted to be as separate from sin and from sinners as possible. So they withdrew from the world, everything about them. You didn't want any dirty, nasty sinners touching you, being around you, certainly not at your house. I bet you Simon, as soon as she walked in, was thinking of a way to get her out of there. And so he recoils at the thought of that woman touching the feet of anybody who called themselves righteous. And here we see an indication of Jesus' ability to read the hearts of men. Now, I'll say that Jesus is very patient with Simon. I mean, in response to this kind of callous indifference, I would have just smited him there on the spot. Here's Jesus' response. Very gentle. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. I think that's putting it about as mildly as you can. Tell me, teacher, he said. I was wondering, tell me, come on. Tell me why you're allowing such a sinful, dirty, nasty person to be around you, nonetheless touch your feet. And Jesus tells him a story, and I love this because you see the concern of Jesus here. And it's not just for the woman, but for Simon as well. Jesus doesn't just tell Simon, hey, you're a jerk and an idiot and a fool, and hear the heart of God. Jesus wants Simon to understand He does this a lot. He tells stories. And he leads people to the point, and you'll notice at the end, where Simon is essentially passing the judgment on himself. So Jesus tells him a story. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so that he forgave the debts of both. Now which of them will love him more? The denarius was a day's working wage for a laborer. And so if you're trying to think about the scale of this, somebody owing 500 of those to somebody, it'd be something like a person owing maybe like $50,000. And then the 50 would be, somewhere around 5,000. Now, I don't know if you've ever gotten a nastygram for the IRS. Surprise in the mail. Not a good surprise, a surprise you owe us money kind of surprise. So imagine, you get one of those letters and you owe $50,000. It's not a happy day either way, even if you only owe $5,000. For most families, this would be very severe. And if you think about it, in the parable, you have 2 people who owe money. The one who owed 500 is the woman. The one who owed 50 is Simon. Maybe in Simon's own estimation, he looked at this one and said, I am 10 times as good as her. Jesus said both of them were unable to pay him back. So he forgave the debts of both. Now this is a departure from the norm. So if you get a letter from the IRS today and you're unable to pay, there's certain things they may do to get that money from you. And some of us have walked that road. Back then, it didn't decide, you can't pay me back, well, don't worry about it. No, you would get sold into slavery. That was the default. If you couldn't pay what you owed to a moneylender, they would sell you into slavery. So for this person to say, you can't pay me back, never mind, it's like $50,000, whatever. So he forgave them. I don't know if you've ever had somebody give you money in a time of need that you were unable to repay. A lot of people really struggle with that. I'll tell you that in the Ministerial Alliance, I'm the person who fields a lot of these calls now, people calling in saying, hey, my power's about to be cut off. I'm just desperate, what can I do? And a lot of these people, it's the first time they've ever sought help from anybody. I can tell as I talk to them because they always say the same thing. I'll pay you back. Because we're uncomfortable with the idea of somebody giving us something that we can't repay. Have you ever been there? Somebody goes to help you, say, I don't want you to really help me as a gift. I just want it to be considered as a loan. Because we hold on, we say, I feel, dishonored in a way. I don't want to just get a handout. And let me tell you, people who struggle with that struggle with receiving God's grace. Because you can't go to God and be like, God, I know you want to just forgive me, but just let me pay you back. Right? I know I did all that stuff. I rebelled against you, and I know all that, but I just want to do something to repay you so I don't feel like I owe you anything. So I tell people who call in the same thing. Don't pay us back. It's a gift. We give it freely. And in doing so, we want you to understand the grace of God. That he forgives you freely and in a way that you can't pay him back. You cannot be self-sufficient when it comes to God and the grace that he gives. So Jesus asks Simon. So he tells a story. 2 people are forgiven different amounts. Both of them were helpless. Both of them forgiven. Who's going to love the guy more? I like Simon's response. I wonder if the wheels are turning, you can kind of see where this is going. Reluctant to even say it, Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Again, Simon, kind of a concerned look on his face. Jesus, where are you going with this? Jesus goes to drive the point home. He turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? As everybody is looking at them. Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little. Jesus sets up a comparison between Simon and this sinful woman who entered. And he says, Simon, I want you to look at her. And again, I imagine Simon looking at her and again being filled with disgust for this person. And Jesus says, you, Simon, when I entered, you didn't wash my feet, you didn't offer me a greeting kiss, and you didn't pour any oil on my head. And these are all customary greetings. And so Simon, as Jesus enters, was really rude to him. And I was just saying, when I worked outside in construction, I got to see people's treatment of strangers every single day, because we'd go up and ask them for water. You know, Jesus says anybody who gives a cup of cold water. I had people who are going to have some harsh words with Jesus, because you'd go there and they'd look at you as a laborer and be like, hey, I'm really thirsty. I can't carry enough water with me. Can I have like a glass of water? And there's some people who just say, hey, the hose is out back. Other people, they bust out everything. You know, oh, let me get you like a sandwich, or, you know, can I get pour drinks? And then out in the country, they try and give you beer, which is weird. Like, you want me to do straight lines here? So the customary greeting at the time is, as you enter, and especially an important dinner party like this, as you would enter, a slave would wash your feet. Your feet are really dirty and nasty walking out there with the sandals. So you take your sandals off and they'd wash your feet. They would give you, if you've ever seen people in some cultures, they give like a kiss on the cheek as a form of greeting. And Simon would be there doing this with everybody. And for a very honored guest, you would have a slave pour a little bit of oil just on your head, and that cracked, dry skin from the heat, it would soothe that. Jesus got none of that. Now, it doesn't tell us if Simon was just this rude to everybody, or if it was one of those like, hey, I'm so glad to see you. Hey, come on in. Come on. Hey, I'm glad. Mwah, good to see you. Hey, Jesus, go around there. Hey, man, it's good to see you. Jesus, all right, I'll just go sit down. So that's the kind of greeting that he gave Jesus. And Jesus said, now in comparison, this woman came in and she poured out her tears and her hair, her honor to wash my feet. She's been kissing my feet. You wouldn't even kiss me on the cheek. And rather than just a little bit of oil, she has poured out expensive perfume to cover what you lacked. Her love for me was great, and yours was little. Her actions showed love. His actions showed indifference. Now, we might say, well, hey, look, if Jesus came over to my house for dinner, I would be like pouring the whole thing of olive oil. I would pull out all the stops. No paper towel napkins for him. And yet, our lives and our love as demonstrated for Christ is not going to be evaluated by some dinner party. Jesus says, anyone who loves me, my Father and I will come and make our dwelling with them. How do we accept God into our lives? Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commands. So some of us, our actions show either indifference towards God or love? Why did they have such a different response? Simon he invites Jesus in, you can tell, and their interaction, that he was just so casual towards him. He invited him in, like, hey, maybe you might have something interesting to say. Like Jesus might be some good thing. Tell me something cool. And the woman, she approaches him in the shame, the public shame that she endured there going into that party. And she approaches him out of desperation. Why did she love much? Jesus tells us her many sins have been forgiven. Now, Jesus doesn't ignore her past, right? Twice here in this account, we're told that, again, whatever was going on, it was major. Jesus says her many sins have been forgiven. And it's interesting. I look around our culture right now. Our response to guilt is this. We try and convince people that you are not sinful and God is not holy. I'll say it again. Our default response in our culture today is to alleviate people's guilt by saying, you aren't guilty and God isn't righteous. As though to reduce the gap between man and God to a manageable level. Jesus says, no, her sins are many and they have been forgiven. We try and say, God's not so great, we're not so bad, and problem solved. Remember the parable. She owes far more than she could ever pay. She's not just, I've got a little money trouble this month. She is in serious trouble, facing slavery trouble, and she is forgiven completely. So that same sense, and we find it uncomfortable, that same sense of the gulf between me and God. And Jesus says that same gulf, when it is closed at the cross, that massive debt being forgiven is what drives her love. It was exactly that feeling of conviction that we try to avoid so much that drove her to seek Jesus, her only refuge, and give this response. And Jesus tells to Simon, whoever has been forgiven little loves little. And if we lose that concept of the holiness and righteousness of God, we lose that sense of the debt that has been forgiven us. It causes us to be indifferent to God. Simon, in his own estimation, he said, I've done nothing to be forgiven. In his estimation of his own life, it would have been more like, not like he even owed $5,000, but like, hey, can I borrow $1 kind of thing. You ever ask somebody for $1 and they say no? What? Some people are like that with God. God owes me this. I'm such a good person. I'm not perfect, but I'm like close enough. So that step of God forgiving me and me being declared righteous as Christ is, they lose the idea of what a tremendous thing that is to say in their life. They say, I've been forgiven little, therefore they love little. Now, hear me on this, church. Hear me. I am not saying that in order for you to love God, you got to go out there and rob like a liquor store or develop, a drug habit or whatever, and go out and just do some crazy stuff so you can come back to church and be like, man, I was like so sinful and God has forgiven me and now I love him even more. And also, when we hear other people share their stories, and I know many people in the church struggle with this, like at any time I share my testimony, I tell what God brought me out of, there's this worry in the back of my mind that anybody who's been faithful to God their whole lives would ever feel somehow inadequate because they never did those things. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus is talking about Simon not as a good person who's relied on the grace of God their whole life. He's somebody who doesn't think he needs Jesus in the first place. So the answer is not for us to do more to be forgiven of, but to recognize, like I said, how great God is. And I guarantee you that if you spend time seeking God's face in study of His Word and in prayer, and if you catch a glimpse of who He really is, nobody will walk away from that encounter considering themselves almost there. Like you have that kind of encounter with God, you will be, no matter what kind of life you've lived, you will be overwhelmed at the fact that that very same God is the one who has forgiven you freely and totally. That is what will make you love Him more. That is what motivates our love. And let us carry that same sense to the world around us, because I know that right now there are people in our town that we want to bring in through this recovery ministry who, if you ask them, what's the standing between you and God? They would say, my debt is at $50,000. It's like the national debt, big and getting bigger every day. And because of that, they feel like the debt is so staggering and so large and so insurmountable. They're like, I can't even make payments on it. There's no way I could ever do this, and so I'm just going to stay gone. I'm going to get as gone as I can get. Because I'm running from that thought. I am doomed. When I came into church, I walked in the doors like Simon. And then God met me there. And I was a hot mess. As I realized the beauty and righteousness of God, and just overwhelmed with that sense of I am in such deep trouble. As I looked at my life, and the debt is so great. God, what can I even do? I had nowhere else to turn but to beg for His forgiveness. And when I realized that that weight had been lifted, I didn't have Jesus at a dinner party to run to, with a jar of perfume, but I felt like running into the streets and doing the same thing. And it's not just past tense. It's been ongoing since then, that there have been times that God has just given me an open window into the dark corners of my own heart. And I've been ashamed at what I've seen. And overcome. God, how can you continue to put up with me? And then when He reassures me of His continuing grace and His continuing work in my life, it's just... it's overwhelming. We realize how much God continues to forgive us. We live in that grace. And it causes our hearts to just overflow with love. Jesus turns to the woman. And Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests begin to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sin? Remember, only God can forgive sins. If you were to come to me with your IRS bill, I'm sorry, I cannot forgive it for you. Jesus claimed that authority. Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. It wasn't her action that saved her. It wasn't pouring of the perfume. All of that was a response to the forgiveness she had already been given. as we come in here today, I don't know your feelings as you entered. If you approach church and you open your Bible with the attitude of Simon, maybe I'll hear something entertaining today. Maybe I'll read something cool. When we are guilty of that attitude of indifference, such a tiny amount of love, God wants to remind us of his amazing grace. Maybe you're here this morning, you feel like that woman, and there's something either in your past or something in your life right now, and that just feels so great and so staggering, and you've lived with those thoughts of like God's forgiveness is for other people. I'll tell you this morning, it is for you. That God wants to just erase all of that. And he wants to change you. I guarantee you that woman left that dinner party a changed person. As we pray today, if you would like to come forward and have somebody pray with you, you can come to the side. If you'd like to just spend some special time with God by yourself, you can come up and pray over here. But let's seek the Lord together. God, how great it is that you love us. That we are reminded of the terrible difference between us and you. You are God and you are not. And God, if we feel that our debt to you is 50,000 or 500 or 50 cents, that you would just so overwhelm us with the truth of your promise to us that all those who cast their trust in Jesus, all those who would throw themselves at your feet, claiming nothing on our own, no merit, no ability to pay you back, but simply to ask you in your goodness and because of the sacrifice of your Son, to look on us with mercy. And we can be absolutely certain that mercy we receive. Then let us leave and let our lives show